Somewhere on the African savanna, 100,000 years ago, a man is sleeping at a different fire than he did last month. Nobody filed paperwork. Nobody called a lawyer, but everyone in the camp understands exactly what happened. He and the woman he'd been sharing a hearth with are no longer together. We tend to picture our earliest ancestors as simple creatures driven purely by survival. Romance feels like a modern invention. Heartbreak feels like something that needed poetry and pop songs to exist. But that assumption is wrong, and the evidence for it is stranger than you'd expect. Our ancestors fell in love. They formed bonds. And yes, they broke up. The question is what that actually looked like when there was no marriage license to tear up and no relationship status to change online. To understand ancient separation, you first have to understand what ancient pairing even meant. For most of our species' existence, there was no wedding, no ceremony, no rings, no vows spoken in front of witnesses. Anthropologists studying the Hadza of Tanzania found something revealing about how this works without paperwork. Hadza couple doesn't marry through ritual, they marry through proximity. After a romantic connection forms, the two simply begin sleeping at the same hearth. That's the entire ceremony. Everyone in camp notices, and the noticing is the marriage, which means ending things works exactly the same way, in reverse. One person moves their sleeping spot. The fire they used to share now holds just one body instead of two. No announcement required, no witnesses summoned. The breakup is written in geography rather than language. Researchers describe Hadza relationships as serial monogamy, one partner at a time, with frequent natural changes. In this system, separation was not dramatic. It was a routine part of life in the band. This wasn't dysfunction. It was the system working as intended for tens of thousands of years. Before ideas like "until death do us part," relationships were far simpler to end. There were no mortgages, no joint accounts, no courts dividing shared lives. In ancient hunter-gatherer life, almost nothing truly belonged to just one person. Food, tools, and shelter were shared by the whole group as a survival system. That meant relationships didn't involve untangling property or finances. There was barely anything individually owned in the first place. So when a couple separated, it wasn't a dramatic split of lives. It was just one person moving their sleeping mat to another spot in the same camp. And because the group stayed together, there was no escaping each other afterward. The same faces were there at every hunt, every gathering, every fire-lit evening. Even after a breakup, they still had to cooperate. Survival meant showing up to the same hunts, the same gathering trips, the same shared fire. Because in a small band, survival depended on cooperation. Even emotional distance couldn't break the need for the group to function as one unit. Anthropologists suggest something surprising. The pain of breakup has always felt the same across human history, even tens of thousands of years ago. But the real shock is this. Separation didn't erase life completely back then. You lost a partner, but not your entire world like homes or possessions. And now we stop guessing. Archaeologists can actually read ancient relationships directly from the ground, in bones and burial patterns. At a site called Sungir in Russia, archaeologists found burials from about 34,000 years ago, carefully arranged and deeply intentional. Genetic analysis shows something unexpected. These people buried together were not closely related, yet were treated with extraordinary care. Researchers realized ancient humans understood the danger of inbreeding. Different groups likely exchanged partners to prevent it. People traveled, met outsiders, and formed broader social and reproductive networks. This required the ability to leave one connection and form another. The flexibility to separate and repair was not a flaw. It helped keep the species healthy. Fast forward to around 4,000 years ago, relationships start shifting from private choices to written rules carved in stone. In ancient Babylon, the Code of Hammurabi is carved into stone, becoming one of the earliest legal systems for marriage and divorce. The laws include detailed rules about marriage and divorce, turning separation into something formal and controlled. A husband could end a marriage by declaration, while a wife often needed to prove mistreatment before a judge allowed separation. Financial consequences were also written in law, requiring return of dowries and ongoing support in certain cases. For the first time, heartbreak didn't just stay between two people. It became something handled by rules and paperwork. It became a transaction governed by written rules, enforced by judges, and recorded for future reference. Ancient Egyptian records reveal a strikingly different approach. Egyptian women held property rights that were unusually progressive for the ancient world. A wife could initiate separation and walk away retaining assets she'd brought into the marriage. Marriage contracts from this period specified what would happen to property if the union dissolved. Actual physical documents have survived thousands of years. Prenups existed before pyramids stopped being built. Laws tell us how ancient societies handled the practical side of separation. But did people back then actually feel what we feel? The grief, the obsession, the inability to stop thinking about someone who's gone? The evidence suggests overwhelmingly yes. Ancient Egyptian love poetry shows overwhelming longing and emotional devastation that feels surprisingly modern. Mesopotamian texts describe jealousy, abandonment, and the pain of watching someone you love move on. These ancient writers weren't analyzing emotion. They were living it directly. Some describe physical symptoms like being unable to eat, consumed by thoughts of someone absent. Across Mesopotamia and Egypt, heartbreak was written down again and again in poems and letters. Modern neuroscience shows heartbreak activates brain regions linked to physical pain. Your brain processes breakup pain similarly to an actual injury response. And across history, from ancient fires to modern mines, heartbreak has always felt the same. Ancient and modern human brains share the same emotional wiring for attachment, loss, and longing. This emotional wiring is not cultural, it predates civilization itself. So what's actually different between a breakup then and now? Mostly logistics. Modern breakup often means complex legal and financial entanglements. Ancient separation was simpler, with fewer possessions and no formal legal system. But the emotional experience of heartbreak stayed consistent across time. Even ancient Egyptian poetry describes grief that feels just like modern heartbreak. The jealousy embedded in ancient Babylonian legal disputes mirrors arguments happening in living rooms tonight. What changed is the paperwork. What stayed the same is the ache. There's something genuinely comforting buried in all of this. Every person who has ever lain awake replaying a conversation, wondering what went wrong, checking for a message that never arrives, that person is participating in something ancient, long before written language, long before love songs, long before anyone thought to carve relationship rules into stone. A hunter on the savanna 100,000 years ago, watching someone he loved sleep at a different fire for the first time. We didn't invent heartbreak, we inherited it. And somewhere between that first quiet, fireless night and whatever you're feeling right now, the species never really changed. We just got better at writing it down.